The first knock was polite. The second wasn't. By the third, my front door rattled like someone wanted to break it down. I wiped the grit from my hands on a shop rag and stepped out of my workshop, still smelling of gasoline and cedar dust. Sunrise threw long amber streaks across the gravel drive, but the figures waiting on my porch didn't look like neighbors stopping by for coffee. Two men in matching polo shirts, badges glinting against their chests, and a woman standing between them with a clipboard clutched like a weapon. "Mr. Kellerman?" she asked, voice sugar-coated with venom. "We need to discuss your unpaid fees." I hadn't even said yes before she shoved a cream-colored envelope into my chest. The paper smelled like perfume and legal threats. $3,200, due immediately. Willowbrook Estates requires full compliance from every homeowner. "I'm not part of your HOA," I said flatly, but the woman just smiled, the brittle, practiced smile of someone who never hears no. Her name was Delilah Hutchcraft, and she ran Willowbrook's Homeowners Association like a private kingdom. Perfect hair, gleaming SUV parked at the curb, posture sharp enough to slice through steel. Behind her, the two so-called officers shifted their weight, like mall cops rehearsing for a part in a crime drama. "You are now," she purred. "County rezoning. Automatic enrollment. It's all very official." I glanced at their badges. Plastic, light enough to swing on a lanyard without tugging at the neck. "Funny," I said. "My late wife worked for the assessor's office. Real government IDs don't make that cheap tapping sound when you knock." The taller man stiffened. Delilah's smile faltered for the first time. "Refusing to pay will result in legal consequences," she said, stepping closer, her perfume cutting through the crisp morning air like smoke. I didn't move. The land beneath our feet, 3.2 acres of Kellerman soil, oak-shadowed and stubborn, had been my family's since 1945. My grandmother raised chickens here. My wife and I planned to grow old here, until cancer stole her before we'd even unpacked the dream. This place was all I had left, and no plastic badge was taking it from me. "I'll tell you what's official," I said, pulling the folded property deed from my back pocket. The paper was creased from years of being checked, double-checked, memorized. "This land doesn't answer to Willowbrook Estates. Never has, never will." Delilah didn't even glance at it. 30 days, she said, her voice tightening. "Comply, or we put a lien on your property. I have connections in local government, Mr. Kellerman. Don't make this hard." With a sharp turn, she motioned to her officers. They followed her down the steps, their clipboards snapping shut in unison. Gravel crunched under their tires as they pulled away, leaving the envelope on my porch like a curse. For a long moment, I just stood there listening to the wind comb through the old oak branches, hearing my grandmother's voice in memory. "Buy truth, even if it costs you." Inside, I set the envelope on the kitchen table beside stacks of yellowed maps, tax receipts, and hand-drawn boundary lines my grandfather had sketched in pencil. This wasn't about lawn height or mailbox design. I could feel it, the kind of wrong that seeps under doors and hides in daylight. By nightfall, I had every document spread across the table like a mechanic disassembling an engine, searching for the faulty part. Somewhere in this mess was proof. Proof that my land wasn't theirs to control. Proof that Delilah's threats were hollow. I didn't know yet how far she'd go. I didn't know about the fake citations, the vandalism, the smear campaigns, or that her precious HOA office sat on my ground like a trespasser in a stolen suit. But I did know one thing. I wasn't giving an inch. When you've buried a wife, a few bullies with clipboards don't scare you. And as I looked out through the window at the dark silhouette of Willowbrook's cookie-cutter homes glowing under porch lights, I realized Delilah Hutchcraft had just picked a fight with the wrong man. The sun hadn't even burned the dew off the pasture the next morning when I heard the hollow thud of tires on my driveway. This time, it wasn't Delilah herself. Just two men in county blue polos stepping out of a white pickup with clipboards at the ready. Marcus Kellerman? The taller one spoke in an official baritone, but his gut hung over his belt like he'd never passed a real fitness test. "We're with environmental and zoning enforcement." Need to discuss some violations. The badge on his lanyard looked like it came from a Halloween costume rack. The shorter guy wouldn't meet my eyes, tapping his pen against the clipboard like a nervous teenager caught in a lie. Sure, I said, wiping grease off my hands. Which department was that again? I must have missed the memo when the county started sending inspectors out unannounced in polo shirts. Their script faltered. The tall one tried again. Operating commercial vehicles on residential property, unpermitted structures, noise complaints. He read the charges like he barely believed them himself. I took the citation, turned it over. Good paper stock. Delilah spared no expense faking legitimacy, but the county seal was crooked. Gentlemen, I said, keeping my voice level, my late wife worked for the assessor's office. I know what a real ID looks like. Their eyes flicked toward each other, then toward their truck. They didn't even bother finishing the performance. Gravel spit from under their tires as they roared off down the road, leaving a cheap badge clattering on my porch. By the time I reached the county clerk on the phone, I already knew the answer. No, sir, we don't have an environmental and zoning enforcement division. Who exactly came to your property? Who indeed? That night, I sat at the kitchen table under the harsh yellow light. The deed to my land spread beside old maps and surveys. The house still smelled faintly of Sarah, lavender detergent in the curtains, lemon polish in the wood grain. Every corner reminded me of what I'd lost, and every letter Delilah pushed under my door reminded me of what I refused to lose again. Grief had taught me strange lessons, that silence is louder than shouting, that an empty bed can weigh 100 pounds, and that some battles are worth fighting even when you'd rather disappear. This land was my last piece of family, the only thing that felt rooted when everything else had come undone. The next day, Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door, carrying a plate of snickerdoodles and the kind of intelligence network only retired schoolteachers possess. "Marcus, honey," she whispered, glancing around like spies might be listening from the hedges. "That woman's stirring up trouble. She's telling folks you're turning this place into an auto salvage yard." I laughed, but it didn't reach my eyes. Funny, I thought rebuilding engines was more honest than stealing money from neighbors. Mrs. Patterson patted my arm. "Don't underestimate her. She's got something new folks convince you're lowering property values just by breathing." The scent of cinnamon cookies filled the air, a reminder of simpler days when this road was still dirt and people waved at passing trucks. I thanked her for the warning and decided if Delilah wanted a public fight, I'd give her one. The following week, I walked into the Willowbrook Community Center like a man holding a lit match in a room full of gasoline. 40 residents turned to stare as I carried a folder of evidence thicker than their HOA rulebook. "Evening, neighbors," I said, voice calm but carrying. "Heard there were concerns about my property." Delilah froze at the podium, her manicured fingers tightening on the microphone. "This is a private meeting for members only," she snapped. "Good thing public property lines don't care about your sign-in sheet," I replied, laying down photos of my grandmother's farm from 1945. "My family's been here longer than this subdivision's been a gleam in a developer's eye. I'll keep my land tidy, but I'm not paying for pools I don't swim in or grass crews I don't need." Murmurs rippled through the room, doubt replacing blind loyalty. Some neighbors leaned in to see the photos. Others avoided my gaze. Delilah's mask cracked just enough to show the panic beneath. "Security," she barked, though there wasn't a guard in sight. 3 uneasy residents half-heartedly tried to usher me out. I handed them copies of my deed with a steady smile. Anyone who wants to talk like civilized neighbors knows where to find me. That night, an official sheriff's cruiser rolled into my driveway. Officer Johnson stepped out, hat low, expression weary. "Mr. Kellerman," he said, "we've had complaints you disrupted a private meeting. Mind telling me your side?" When I showed him the citations from Delilah's fake inspectors, his frown deepened. "Keep documenting everything," he advised. "She's crossing lines that carry jail time." As his taillights disappeared down the gravel road, I stood in the quiet yard, my grandmother's oak trees swaying like sentinels. This wasn't a property dispute anymore. It was a war of nerves. And if Delilah Hutchcraft wanted to play dirty, she was about to find out I don't back down. Not from grief, not from bullies, and definitely not from plastic badges. 3 days after the meeting, I woke to the hiss of escaping air and the acrid tang of fresh rubber. My work truck, the same truck I'd rebuilt after Sarah passed because fixing machines felt easier than fixing myself, sat lopsided in the driveway. All 4 tires slashed clean through. I crouched down, tracing the cuts with my fingertips. Whoever did this wasn't a vandal, swinging a knife for fun. The slices were deliberate, professional, someone who knew exactly how to ruin a man's day. But Delilah made her first mistake. She thought my security cameras were just the ones bolted under the eaves. She didn't know about the 2 extras I'd hidden in an old oak tree and behind the barn. By noon, I had crisp video on my laptop. Delilah Hutchcraft herself, high heels crunching my gravel, directing 2 hooded men like a conductor leading an orchestra of destruction. Real professional job, I muttered as I burned copies of the footage onto 3 different flash drives. My late wife used to say paranoia was just preparation waiting to be proven right. That evening, while I waited for the tow truck, Mrs. Patterson shuffled over again, worry deepening the lines in her face. "Marcus, honey, she's calling you dangerous now," she whispered. "Said you're planning to turn your land into an illegal auto shop." I glanced at the smashed truck and forced a smile. Guess I'll need a new delivery van for all that imaginary business. But inside, something cold tightened in my chest. This wasn't just bullying. This was war. I called Detective Williams, the fraud investigator Officer Johnson had mentioned. "You might want to see this," I said, forwarding the footage. He showed up 2 hours later, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who smelled trouble before it knocked. "This isn't harassment anymore," he said, watching Delilah on the grainy night vision feed. "This is criminal intimidation. And I think it's part of something bigger. Bigger than fake cops and tire slashing." I asked. "Marcus," he said quietly, "we've been tracking a pattern of HOA scams. Harassment campaigns to force people out of their homes, then fraudulent insurance claims on the damage they create. You're not our first target, just our first one who fights back." The words landed heavy. Somewhere between the smell of cut rubber and the metallic click of the flash drive case closing, I realized this wasn't just about protecting my land. This was about stopping her from bleeding an entire neighborhood dry. The next day, Jake Morrison, Willowbrook's soft-spoken treasurer, called from a payphone like a man in a spy movie. His voice shook. "Marcus, I think she's been stealing from everyone. Landscaping invoices for work that never happened. Legal fees to firms that don't exist. I made copies before she could shred the records. We met in a highway diner, far from neighborhood eyes." Jake slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside, bank statements, checks to shell companies, cash withdrawals that smelled like fraud from a mile away. "She's stolen nearly 200 grand, Jake said, his coffee trembling in its cup. "And Marcus, that office where she holds meetings? I checked property records. It's not even on HOA land. It's sitting on yours." I stared at him, the low hum of the diner blending with the thump of my pulse. "You're telling me the building she uses to run this scam is trespassing?" "Half of it," he said. "And if you prove it, every decision she's made in that building is legally questionable." Something shifted in me then, like an engine finally firing after weeks of tinkering. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was offense. That night, I spread Jake's evidence across my kitchen table beside my grandmother's old deed and the fresh survey maps I'd ordered. Under the harsh fluorescent light of my workshop, the picture came into focus. A woman so desperate to hold power that she'd built her throne on stolen land and thought no one would notice. But I noticed, and for the first time since Sarah died, I felt something more than grief or anger. I felt purpose, sharp, clear, and dangerous to anyone standing in my way. The morning fog hadn't even burned off when I caught Delilah trespassing again. She'd parked her white Escalade in my driveway like she owned it, phone camera clicking as she strutted around snapping photos of my barn. "This driveway easement is HOA common area," she announced, not even bothering to look up. "You're required to share access with community vehicles." "Ma'am," I said evenly, "this driveway has been in my family since 1945. Move your car." "I don't think so." She smiled thinly, thumbs flying over her screen. "Documenting violations for our attorney. You'll regret this." 20 minutes later, she was back with a landscaping crew dismantling my mailbox. "This structure violates community aesthetic standards," she told the workers, waving manicured hands like a queen granting an execution. I called the post office. "Mail obstruction is a federal offense," the supervisor confirmed. "Reinstall it wherever you want and file a complaint immediately." So I drove to Home Depot, bought the biggest cast iron mailbox I could find, and engraved Kellerman 1945 across the side in bold letters. If Delilah wanted a mailbox war, she picked the wrong mechanic. But beneath my defiance, I could feel the pressure mounting. That evening, Jake Morrison showed up pale and sweating, a man carrying a secret too heavy for one set of shoulders. "Marcus, she knows I've been talking to you," he whispered. "Threatened to report my unpermitted deck addition. Said she'd bankrupt me with legal fees if I didn't stay quiet." "She's scared," I said. "That means we're winning." Jake shook his head. "Scared people do stupid things. I've got kids here, Marcus. If she comes after them, she won't," I said, though I wasn't sure. The next morning, my tires weren't slashed. They were gone. For stripped rims resting on cinder blocks like some cruel joke. By noon, the power went out. The utility company swore I had 3 months of unpaid bills, despite my automated bank statements proving otherwise. Someone was trying to make me disappear one inconvenience at a time. I spent the afternoon with my attorney, David Blackwood, who laid out the strategy like a general preparing for siege. "We'll file a quiet title action," he explained. "If the HOA can't prove ownership of that office land, they forfeit every claim." And Delilah? Her financial records show nearly $200,000 siphoned into shell companies. Add impersonating officers, harassment, vandalism. She's looking at prison time. But we need irrefutable proof before we strike. I slid him the flash drives from my hidden cameras. Then let's make it irrefutable. That night, as rain drummed against the windows, I sat at the kitchen table alone, staring at Sarah's photo. She'd been gone 2 years, but in moments like this, I could still hear her laugh, still see her wiping engine grease off my cheek after late nights in the workshop. "Wish you were here," I murmured to the empty room. "You tell me not to let these people push me around." The phone rang. "Detective Williams." "Marcus, be careful. We've got evidence Delilah's not working alone. This is organized harassment. And they're escalating. You're not just fighting an HOA president anymore. You're fighting a criminal enterprise." The warning felt heavier than any threat Delilah had thrown at me. Later that night, headlights cut through my curtains. I grabbed my flashlight and crept outside. No tires slashed this time. Just spray paint across my workshop doors. Get out or else. But the fools missed my hidden cameras again. By morning, Williams had the footage, Delilah directing the same 2 men from the tire slashing incident, this time holding gas cans. "They were planning to burn you out," he said grimly. "You need allies, Marcus. This isn't a one-man fight anymore." He was right. That afternoon, I turned my workshop into a war room. Jake brought HOA bank statements. Mrs. Patterson brought historical maps proving my family's ownership. David laid out legal filings like ammunition, and Sarah Pohl's son, an investigative reporter with a nose for corruption, promised the story would go public. "Delilah's desperate," David warned. "She'll try to bribe you, threaten you, smear you. Don't take the bait. Just keep gathering proof." For the first time since this began, I saw real fear in Jake's eyes. "Marcus, what if she does something we can't come back from?" I looked around at the documents covering my grandmother's old oak table, the smell of motor oil mixing with printer ink and rain-soaked earth. "She already has," I said quietly. And now we finish it. The community center had never seen this many cars. Pickup trucks and minivans jammed the lot, headlights washing over wet pavement as neighbors filed inside, carrying folded arms and sharper questions. Outside, local reporters adjusted cameras, waiting for something big to happen. I arrived with my allies, David Blackwood with his leather briefcase of evidence, Jake Morrison clutching the treasurer's ledgers like a lifeline, Mrs. Patterson carrying a folder of yellow deeds, and Detective Williams blending into the crowd in plain clothes. Inside, the room buzzed like a live wire. Folding chairs scraped across the tile as people squeezed into every corner. Delilah Hutchcraft stood at the front, perfect navy suit pressed flat, hair gleaming under fluorescent lights. She looked calm, too calm, the way a predator does right before it lunges. "This meeting will address routine HOA business only," she announced, voice steady but tight. "No time for personal grievances." "Point of order," Jake said, rising from the third row, voice trembling but clear. "By law, homeowner concerns must be heard in public meetings, whether or not you approve of them." Delilah's jaw flexed. "Sit down, Mr. Morrison." But then a new voice cut through the room. "Actually, let him speak." County Commissioner Williams stood, flashing his badge. "Transparency is not optional." Delilah's lips thinned. "Fine," she snapped. "Limited comment." That was my cue. I walked to the front, carrying the surveyor's report and the manila envelope of bank records. The murmurs died as I spread the papers across the table. "Neighbors," I said, voice even but carrying, "you've been told I'm a threat to your property values. But the real threat has been sitting right up there behind that microphone." I held up the certified survey. "This is official county documentation showing the HOA office you all pay rent for was built on my land. My family's land, which means every decision Delilah made in that building is legally questionable." The room rippled with shock. But I wasn't finished. I nodded to Jake, who began handing out copies of ledgers and bank statements. "For 3 years, nearly $200,000 in your fees have been funneled into shell companies owned by Delilah's relatives. Landscaping invoices for work that never happened. Legal fees to firms that don't exist. Security contracts to her nephew. This isn't about lawns or mailboxes. This is theft. Lies," Delilah shouted, but her voice cracked. "This is slander from a bitter widower with a vendetta." The widow comment drew a collective gasp. Even her loyalists winced. Mrs. Patterson stood slowly, her cane tapping the floor like a gavel. "Delilah Hutchcraft," she said, voice ringing like church bells, "I've known this land since before you were born. I watched the Kellermans raise families and fix engines while you were learning how to fake smile. This man buried his wife 2 years ago and came here for peace. You gave him hell and stole from every family in this room." Applause erupted. Neighbors who'd stayed silent now leaned forward, eyes blazing with anger. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over the screen. "And if you doubt me," I said quietly, "listen to this." Delilah's own voice filled the room from my speaker. $50,000 to make this disappear. Marcus, think about your business. No lawyers, no media. Just walk away." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. Then Detective Williams stepped forward, badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Delilah Hutchcraft, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, bribery, and obstruction of justice." Gasps turned into stunned whispers as he read her rights. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed like a gunshot. Delilah's calm cracked wide open. Her voice went shrill. "You don't understand. I built this community. I deserve compensation." "No," I said, meeting her eyes as she was led away. "You stole it." Neighbors parted as Williams escorted her out. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, capturing every step of her downfall. Inside the community center, anger shifted to relief. Strangers shaking hands, friends hugging, people realizing they'd been played. Jake stepped to the microphone, his voice steady now. I motioned to dissolve the current HOA board and rebuild with full transparency. No more lies. No more fear. Nearly every hand went up. As I gathered the papers from the table, I caught Mrs. Patterson smiling through tears. "Marcus, your grandmother would have been proud," she whispered. Outside, rain had stopped, leaving the pavement shining like new. For the first time in months, I felt the same, scraped raw but clean. A month after Delilah Hutchcraft's arrest, Willowbrook looked different. The lawns were still green, the porches still painted neat white, but something had shifted under the surface, like the ground itself had exhaled. Neighbors who used to wave from a distance now stopped to talk, offering pie or handshakes. People who'd once glared at me for resisting Delilah's rules now crossed the road to thank me. It felt strange. I hadn't fought for their praise. I'd fought for something deeper. Her trial moved quickly. Fraud, embezzlement, bribery, criminal intimidation. The list of charges filled 2 pages. When the guilty verdict came down, she didn't look at me. She just stared straight ahead, lips trembling, the polish stripped clean from her perfect image. But justice is quieter than you think. There's no trumpet blast, no Hollywood swell of music. Just a gavel, a sentence, and the slow return of ordinary life. On a cold morning in November, I walked the property line with the surveyor one last time. The boundary stakes glinted red against frosted grass, marking exactly where my grandmother's farm ended and the HOA never began. The office Delilah built still squatted over the line like an unwelcome guest. Soon it would be gone, dismantled by court order, brick by brick. "Feels good to see it in writing," Jake Morrison said, stepping over the old stone wall. His face looked lighter now, freed from months of fear. "Whole board resigned yesterday. We're starting over. No more closed doors, no more fake fees." "Glad to hear it," I said. Mrs. Patterson joined us, her cane sinking slightly in the soft earth. "Your grandmother used to say land remembers," she murmured. "All the good you pour into it, all the harm you let slide. You pour good back in, Marcus." I didn't answer right away. My throat tightened. Sarah's picture still sat on the mantel at home, her laugh still living in the corners of this house. She would have teased me for turning the kitchen into a legal war room, but she'd have been proud I didn't back down. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the workshop again, the smell of motor oil and sawdust wrapping around me like an old coat. For months, this place had been a fortress. Now it felt like what it was always meant to be, a sanctuary for building, not hiding. The last of Delilah's spray-painted threats had been scrubbed off the barn doors. The new mailbox stood planted firm by the road, Kellerman 1945 catching the sun. I wasn't naive. Corruption doesn't disappear just because one person goes to prison. Someone else would try to cut corners to grab power. But I learned something in this fight about land, about grief, about myself. Grief had made me quiet, but this battle had given me a voice again. Not angry, not bitter, steady. The kind of voice that doesn't ask permission to exist. The evening settled soft and gold over the pasture. I sat on the tailgate of my truck with a cup of black coffee, watching the sun slide behind the oaks my grandfather planted. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was defending something fragile. I felt rooted. Neighbors stopped by as dusk deepened. Jake with his kids, Mrs. Patterson with a plate of cookies, even Officer Johnson on his way home. We talked about small things, winter plans, the new HOA bylaws, the weather turning cold. But under it all was something bigger. Community. The kind you don't buy with dues or protect with plastic badges. The kind you earn by standing together. As the last light faded, I whispered to the air, to Sarah, to my grandmother, and everyone who'd walked this ground before me. I kept it safe. I kept us safe. The wind moved through the oak branches, soft as breath, as if the land itself was answering. And for the first time in years, I didn't just feel like I was surviving on this property. I felt like I was home.